Welcome to the Bladtcast. As always, I am Christian Bladt, and joining me today is Chad Weiss, who is has a lot of similar sort of interests in some of the music you like. Apparently, a little bit of all kinds of music, I'm told. But you have a weekly show called Vice City, which we'll talk about. We'll get to know you. But Chad, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Christian, thank you for having me. I can't wait to talk music with you. And you were told correctly. I do like a lot of different music, so your information is correct.
Is accurate. All
It's
right. I didn't get
accurate.
bad
Yeah,
intel, as they say.
yeah. You
You
got
know,
you got good intel. Yeah,
I got
good
the good
job.
intel for a
You've got the
change.
right one, Mister Bond.
Yeah, it's funny. I literally yesterday I was talking to George Lynch, Lynch Mob,
Who?
Dawkins, the
Yeah,
guitarist, and
yeah.
I mentioned his Facebook, and he's like, "I'm on Facebook," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, clearly you're not that involved in it, but there's a Lynch Mob official," and he's like, "Well, you learn something new every day,"
Yeah,
but.
exactly.
In any case, so just to tell people a little bit about yourself, and when I talk music with musicians or pretty much anybody, I always like to start with sort of some of the earliest music memories you have. Did you grow up in a very musical house? Was music always on a lot?
Hmm.
What do you sort of remember the little Chad Weiss? What do you remember hearing around the
Little Chad
house?
Weiss. Well, nobody in my house, including myself, were had musical instruments. We didn't play anything. I never learned to play anything. I wish I did. I mean, it's never too late. I could do that anytime
Sure.
and be maybe as good as George Lynch. You never know. But
Hey.
hey, it's anything is possible. I mean, doing this is anything is possible, right? But growing up, music was a big part of my life. It was always around. I remember I grew up in the era of just after vinyl when cassettes, the regular cassettes used to come out. That's
Sure.
my era. So there was always, my mom had these briefcases, these Halliburtons of tape cassettes that you could find all the time. That was her tape collection. I'm pretty sure there was some vinyl around. My mom had different, let's call them friends, who had tape cassettes. I used to get into their tape collection as well too. My aunt had that. The radio was always on. We used to play obviously the tape deck, the tape cassettes in the car back in those days before even CD players were in there, and even now they're not apparently.
Yeah,
Old
I
school.
know. It's a
Yeah,
lot of times you get a rental car out on the road and there's not even the slot for the CD player. It's
yeah.
all like plugging your phone into it. I know. And it's
Can't believe that.
that used to be part of the fun of taking a trip is like, I had this
Yeah,
little travel like clamshell for like, I don't know, 8 to 10 CDs. I'm like, what am I going to bring? What am
I
I going to
know.
need on the trip? And obviously there's the good side of like, well, I have my iPhone, so
Yeah.
I have like all the music I own with me. But there was something fun about it. I agree with you, Chad.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, well, at least now I have satellite radio, which helps too. But at the
Yeah,
same time,
definitely.
I still have a CD player. I still have a 2014, my Chevrolet Cruise. So I'm still lucky in that regard. But yeah, the days of that are very vivid and very fun, and that helped me discover a whole lot of music that honestly stays with me today, as far as what I like, genre wise and artist wise. That's never left me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely a lot of common ground in that sense
Hmm.
because a lot of the bands I grew up with are the bands I still get excited if they put out a new album. They're the bands that I
Yeah.
still go and see. But sort of a similar, more low tech version of that was my mom growing up had two 8 tracks, and
Oh, nice.
they did not inspire great appreciation for the kind of music I would go on. And like she had Barry Manilow's greatest hits and John Denver's greatest hits.
Oh, nice.
So,
I'll take
you know,
Manilow.
yeah, well, and I'm not going to discount the songwriting or vocal abilities of either of them. Well, at least back then,
Right.
and but it was certainly just like Copacabana and a
I write
Country
the
Road.
songs. Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Writing the songs.
Yeah.
But my dad had a really, really comprehensive record collection. My parents got married in 1974, so his record collection stopped right about 1972, 73.
Huh.
So he had like all the
Interesting.
Stones albums up until then. He had all the Beatles albums up until then.
Nice.
The American versions, obviously. I dug through there. He had like the 6 Real Doors albums, and
Wow.
so it was great when I found all that stuff. And in those days, he had all the records, but I was like, well, I had to record them onto cassette so that I could listen to them in my room because I didn't have a record player. And yeah, when I first started listening to anything and everything, it really was about the cassette. Uh, I think by the time I was in high school, I had, in the early '90s, I had a CD player, but a new album came out. I was getting the tape,
Oh
and
yeah, 100%.
It's not a great sounding delivery system for music, but I still have an affinity for it, because it just takes me back. A friend of mine was going through the process of digitizing some of his old cassettes. This is literally within the last week. And he posted that image that we all remember.
Yeah.
The tape that snaps, or the tape that becomes unwound, and you have to use a pencil to wind it back up.
Or your fingers, if you get your nail in there, kind of do your fingernail to kind of get in there. I did that for him to find a pencil. Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah. And I have an older brother who's 5 years older than me. So he was definitely, like listening to, buying his own albums, hard rock, metal, stuff like that. When I was still predominantly listening to top 40, and, in like the late 80s, we're talking like 88, 89, all of a sudden top 40 did have a little bit of everything. You would have, Poison would have a song on the record. The Def Leppard Hysteria album was huge.
Motley Crue was in there.
Yeah, the Def Leppard Hysteria album and Beastie Boys' License to Ill were like the first two cassettes that I, just basically taped my brother's tapes. And I'm like, well, I want these in my room so I can listen to them when I want. And, it just sort of goes from there. What were some of the earliest albums you remember that you, Chad, personally just like you went out and bought, or, maybe you borrowed your friend's copy, sort of like I did with my brother,
Well, I borrowed a lot of those cassettes from my family, from my mom and my aunt. I remember the Rod Stewart album, Out of Order, from '88. That was one of the cassettes I took from my aunt. The Fleetwood
Is that the
Mac
one with Forever Young on it?
Yeah.
Sure,
Forever Young, yeah. Crazy About Her, Wild Horses, Wild Horse, it's probably my favorite Stewart record. But Fleetwood Mac's greatest hits. These are ones that I took or borrowed, right? But ones I actually bought with my own money or had bought specifically for me. That was more when I was a teenager in the '90s. That's more CDs is when I started. I did the Columbia House thing.
Oh, of course.
And I started getting a bunch of just your standard stuff at that time, like AC/DC, Guns N' Roses, Ozzy, that kind of like that was my kind of my intro. I did some country as well too. I did a little bit of Dwight Yoakam, George Strait. Sure. I had even some pop. I had Mariah Carey. I had a lot of mix when I first started getting CDs. So that was my first CDs I started to buy. I remember getting Appetite for Destruction was the first GNR record I got, as well on CD, obviously, but and that really opened the door for it, specifically about hard rock and heavy metal, or it's more hard rock when you think about it. But that's kind of my gateway into that world, was getting just the standards of the day, GNR, AC/DC, things like that, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that, basically sort of dipping back in, and getting some of that stuff that came before, was definitely, it's a part of putting, anybody's appreciation who was getting into that kind of music. The reason I'm wearing the shirt I am is that this is an Alice Cooper t-shirt from his Trash tour.
Oh,
and,
yes.
that was
I got that album. I forgot that's one I got on CD.
That was a big
Stupid
one for me. Trash. And then the next year, Hey Stupid.
Yeah,
that was the first show I ever went to. I've lived in LA for 20 years, but I grew up in the New York City area. So I saw him at what was then the Ritz. It had previously been Studio 54. And so in March of 1990, that was the first show I went to. And, I was already really in on that album, and, we'd like kind of gotten the greatest hits. I tell the story all the time because I always have to give my mom credit. The show was 16 and up, but I was only 14. So my mom basically made a fake ID for me, and it was like a school ID. And because I wasn't trying to drink, because I was just a kid, they just kind of looked at it and they're like, and she's just like, well, I'm his mother. And they're like, whatever, just go in. They were just like, we just want to tear your ticket.
Stop.
Yeah.
No fun.
So, nice. So that was big. And,
That's
I saw
awesome.
him. And then that summer at the county fair near where I grew up, I saw Kiss, Slaughter opened. And then I saw Black Crowes and Aerosmith, and Whitesnake with Faster Pussycat opening. So it was like, that was like just this crazy, few month span. And, if you go from Alice Cooper to Kiss to Aerosmith, you're like, oh, so every rock show is really big like that, right? And you're like, well, no, not really. Sometimes they just kind of stand on the stage. That's cool too.
Yeah.
But,
Depends.
it took some getting used to.
It's not all
for sure.
theatrics like Kiss Kiss was, I think if you saw them in 90 or 90, whatever, you probably just saw them without the makeup. So they weren't
It was
really
without
doing
the
those
makeup,
theatrics.
but that was the Hot in the Shade tour where they had like this
that was a
big
great
Sphinx. And they
that
had
was a great tour. Apparently, I missed it, obviously, but
they'd gone a little bit further back in their catalog at that point.
so
They'd done some older stuff they hadn't done in a while.
Eric's last hurrah, unfortunately.
Eric Carr, and so it was definitely like a great moment in time. 1990s, really, when I started going to concerts. I'd gotten some albums by then, and the bands that I listed off are, I still see Alice Cooper about once a year. I've been with my wife for 19 years. So I started dragging her along to see Alice Cooper. And then about 10 years ago, we went, and it was a good show. And she's like, do we have time for me to buy a t-shirt? And I'm like, what? Yeah. Nice. I don't care how much traffic piles up just because we did it. You want to spend money on a t-shirt? Yes, let's do that.
Wear it loud and proud.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's I think that sort of the 90s has kind of that line of demarcation. It's not the moment that Nirvana's Nevermind came out, but that sort of starts the wheels of like record companies like, oh, I'm not really as interested in this stuff that I was even 4 months ago, And I think in a perfect world, rock was able to exist as sort of like, well, that's alternative and that's hard rock and that's metal and that's this and that's that. But then it was just like, we don't want to put out we're not going to get behind and promote like the third Skid Row album and sort of that kind of thing.
That's a shame.
So
probably might be my favorite. I think it's my favorite. Subhuman Race.
Yeah.
My favorite of theirs. Yep.
Yeah.
I like them all, but I love what's on there.
Yeah. And Warrant has that album Dog Eat Dog that came out around the same time.
And Ultraphobic, right? Tesla had Bust a Nut. There's so many great things. Exactly. I know.
So there's a lot of great stuff that sort of comes out.
Absolutely.
And those are coming out at the time where I'm like, oh, I still like this music. But then you start, I had started college and I was like, oh, but I guess it's like the Pearl Jam CD that should probably be on the top of my pile. I wasn't bringing any girls back to my room anyway, but just in case I had, I needed to be ready.
Oh, you're cool. You know what? The latest music trends. I'll stay the night. I'll stay in your dorm tonight.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. And so it's definitely an interesting time to think back on because in the moment you're not really thinking about it. And years ago, I talked to Mark Slaughter from Slaughter about it, and he's one of those bands that it definitely
did a great record at that time
too. Things sort of. And he does, he really doesn't have a bad outlook on it. He's like, yeah, I mean, those bands all put out great music. It's not their fault, It's just the record companies are who he's mad at. But he's like, Alice in Chains were great. Nirvana put out some great records in a very short amount of time. Soundgarden's a perfect example. Yeah, and it's funny because in 1991 I saw Soundgarden open for Guns N' Roses at Madison Square Garden. Like that billing might surprise people, to think back, but it made perfect sense in the moment when Bad Motorfinger came out.
Absolutely, yeah, it fit right in.
Yeah. So what were sort of laying that kind of foundation, what were some of the earliest shows you went to, whether they were bands playing somewhere or you actually like buying concert tickets and going to a show, Chad?
Well, I wish I had something more impressive to tell you about that. I didn't start really seeing shows until I moved to where I'm at now, which is the major. I came from a small village called Beachburg on the East Coast in Ontario. I'm in Canada. Right. But until I moved to what's our capital city, which is called Ottawa, until I moved up here, I didn't really see any shows. So that would have been around 2003. So by then I was about, 20 years ago. So I was about 20, 21. Right. So the first actual concert I went to was a band called Loverboy. They're a Canadian band, and I'm sure you've heard them too.
And south of the border, we know Working for the Weekend.
Turn Me Loose.
Yeah, there's a few other decent.
There's a few. They got some good hits.
Yeah, and
the Top Gun soundtrack. They did some songs on there. Yeah,
I've talked to people who've seen them in the last couple of years, and they still put on a great show.
Oh yeah, they're opening for who are they opening for now? Foreigner.
They were. They were with Night Ranger at one point.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah. They're doing the Foreigner tour, but I saw them and I got to meet the drummer, Mike. Matt Frenette is the guy's name. I got to meet the drummer after the show, and he signed my ticket, which was awesome. And I told him,
Nice.
he's like, I hope you enjoyed the show. I said, yeah, it's my first show. It's the first concert I've ever been to. And he's like, oh, this is your first concert, and it's Loverboy. Where have you been all these years? You've been living in your mom's basement? Like, how come? That's what he said. You've been living in your mom's basement?
And were you like, well, no, I mean,
yeah,
it's,
actually, I was.
upstairs. It's upstairs at my
it's
mom's
upstairs
house,
now. Actually, we're right in the same level, but yeah, no lie. So I got roasted by the drummer of Loverboy. That's my claim to fame.
That's pretty great, though.
Early on, yeah. I'll never forget that.
Look, you were saying whatever you said, 2002, 2003. I mean, there's a lot of ways it could have gone. Your first show could have been Limp Bizkit. It could have been Creed. It could have been Nickelback. It could have been some of these. Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
They were good. I got heavy into Limp Bizkit for sure. Creed a little bit, but definitely I was big on Limp Bizkit.
Right. And now the interesting thing,
not shy to admit that.
Whenever I talk to anybody who, well, you know what, though, it's all come back around again, you know, because like Fred Durst has like sort of reinvented himself as this like elder statesman.
Well. Yeah.
And I mean,
they're playing arenas, they're playing some stadiums somewhere. When they play, when they don't over tour, which is great. So when they play, that people come out and see them.
Yeah, one of the things that whenever I talk to anybody who grew up anywhere in Canada, I'm always interested in. There's usually those examples because of, I guess they call it the Canadian content law. So like if you were to turn on, you turn on the radio, you would hear you would hear a little bit more Canadian music than you would have heard, even in like, Buffalo or Seattle, places that are along the border. But it seems like those rules are really strict, because I remember, this is going back 30 some odd years, Bryan Adams, who of course is Canadian, I'm surprised he's not on the currency at this point.
Yeah, he should be. Might as well.
Yeah, might as well
Monopoly money.
But he had that song from the Robin Hood movie, and like it didn't fall under the Canadian content laws because it was like co-written
All for Love,
British,
I think it was.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think he had a British co-writer.
Yeah.
And you're like,
something to say about that.
Yeah. It's like, I'm Bryan Adams, It's like, well, if you co-written it with Martin Short, maybe that would have worked,
or Geddy Lee or somebody.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, that's more legitimate. That would be better. Yeah. So what would were there bands that you feel like that you realized later, like, oh, I'm into this band? And Loverboy's not even a great example because they had the success, sort of outside of Canada. Were there bands like the example you always hear? It's a different kind of music than we're talking about, but the band that I always heard about was this band, the Tragically Hip, was huge in Canada, but very cult following in the US. Were there bands that you were like, oh, I love this band, but then you realize like, oh wow, people outside of Canada might not really know this band or this artist or performer?
Well, I know just from knowing and looking into bands, I know there's a ton of bands like that. There's a band here called Platinum Blonde, which they're not even big enough as they should be here, but they are, I guess. And they have a couple of big hits over here. There's bands like that all the time. Like you said, the Tragically Hip. There's a band called The Tea Party. There's a band called Our Lady Peace. Maybe you've heard of them. I think they made some headway too. Some do, some don't. It depends on the era too. The CanCon thing, going back to that, I don't know if you talk to many people about it, but being here, growing up in it, it's not good. It doesn't really help the artist either. It's not a great thing. People think it is because it's supposed to give you that, homegrown advantage to people who are Canadian, who grow up here and have music here. It's supposed to give them that advantage, but really it hinders a lot of people because they only give it to certain people. Like you give a great example with Bryan Adams. So he worked with Sting, and he worked with who's the other guy on that? I forget. There's a third guy on that song, I think, Sting and somebody. But yeah, he worked with people outside of Canada. So anytime that happens, they don't get recognized for CanCon. Another good example is Sebastian Bach. Okay, so he was born in the Bahamas, but he grew up in Canada. So he's Canadian. He's got a Canadian citizenship. So they don't play Skid Row. They don't consider that as CanCon. They don't play his solo stuff because they don't consider that CanCon because he works with American artists, or Skid Row is an American band from Jersey.
Right.
So he doesn't get that kind of reaction. So they're so what's the word? They're so like they have such a stranglehold or like a vice grip on the way.
it seems like it's a rigid like checklist
Yeah.
where it's like,
You have to
you
be
have to have
this criteria,
this, yeah,
this
you have to
piece or
be this
that.
Canadian.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you have to be that you're
and
not Canadian enough or you don't
yeah,
work Canadian enough. If you go through there, another band like Helix, okay, they're a Canadian
sure.
band, true, and all the members I believe are Canadian, but they signed to the American branch of at the time I think it was what was their label? I think it was EMI or something like that. It was the American branch or arm of the label. So they don't get a lot of love over here because they, as far as I guess what Canada CanCon laws are, oh they chase the American standard. They chase the American format. To me, it shouldn't matter. Music is just music. I mean, we get a lot of British acts over here, and I'm sure over in the States as well too.
Yeah.
There's people coming from all over Sweden, Switzerland. We have all kinds of talent from all over the world. It shouldn't matter where you come from. I think that there's no content laws like that in the United States. I don't think we need it. It doesn't really serve us here to have a Canadian song played once every 15 minutes. I don't even know what the rules are. It's so stupid. I think it's 15 minutes or so. You got to put one Canadian artist per block or something. I don't know. It doesn't benefit those artists. I think it kind of puts a handicap on them because then they're viewed as, oh, they're just Canadian artists. They just have a Canadian audience. That's it. I find it doesn't give them enough opportunity. I don't think it serves what whoever thought of the idea of CanCon for. It might have a good idea in principle, but what it's executed, I don't think it worked out. I mean, people can debate me on that. I'm sure people who know more about it can debate me on it. But to me, it does not do a good thing for Canadian artists. It shouldn't matter. It should just be music across the board.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard enough artists talk about it in the sense where it seems like, yeah, probably very early in your career, it can definitely help. But that's also like, if you're a
You can
band
do
from
that anywhere. Yeah,
yeah, if you're a band from Houston and
yeah,
a
Houston
couple
local
of
radio can play
yeah,
you, anywhere
right,
in
and
anywhere in
maybe they play
Texas.
you in
Like,
Dallas too, and it starts to
yeah,
build it, that way.
you can
But
do that
yeah,
here in Ontario. If you're an Ontario band, okay, you can get played in Ontario. But then eventually, if you're good enough, you'll transcend the borders, as it were, of the countries, and you'll just be heard all over the world, especially now with the internet too. I mean, you don't even need that CanCon. I think that's another thing that kind of like needs to cut it at the knees. We don't
yeah,
need
but
that. We have internet now. We don't need to like, oh, this is Canadian content. This is within our borders. No, we can
yeah, and it's
just let everyone hear it.
the distinction you give with Sebastian Bach was interesting because, yeah, obviously for Skid Row, the other guys from Jersey, but his solo band, I mean, I've
Mostly
heard
Americans, but not even.
yeah,
I
there's a
think they,
couple of Canadians, but it's like you need
yeah,
one more. If you had,
yeah,
like,
you just need
could
one
you get a
more.
Canadian drummer, Bass?
Yeah,
Do you think
you
that's
can get a
possible?
Canadian, maybe a tour manager, maybe a manager. Your manager's
Yeah.
Rick Sales. He's not Canadian. Oh, you're out of luck. Sorry, you're not getting played here. Too bad.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's interesting though. You
It's a
talked
joke.
about sort of the region you grew up in, the
Yeah.
part of Ottawa you grew up in,
Yeah.
it wasn't big enough where you got a lot of shows. And
No,
I mean,
that's Toronto.
I
Toronto is the
yeah,
big metropolis for music, not Ottawa. Ottawa's a
yeah, I
sleepy
mean,
government town.
yeah, it's a sleepy government
For
town.
the
Well,
capital
you
of
know what?
Canada. Yeah.
To be fair, like Washington D.C. used to be that way too. Like I
Yeah.
interned there one summer, and then I
Nice.
realized that the train system, it like closed at midnight. I'm like,
Yeah.
what?
That was
Like
here.
the
Yeah.
bands I want to see don't even go on till 11:30.
Yeah.
So it
Shut
was a
it
lot of
down.
like, yeah, you'd have to. Yeah, it's like, nope, they're gonna
Everyone
do
go
it.
to bed.
It's definitely better now,
Got to pass some
but
bills in the morning. Get your ass to
yeah,
bed.
you mentioned Toronto, and it
Yeah.
reminded me that I had a group of friends who went to Cornell, which is upstate New York. It's
Mm.
Ithaca. It's a couple hours,
Yeah.
and we wanted to go and see. There were two bands. This sub pop band, Love Battery, was touring with the presidents of the United States of America.
Nice.
Ironically, I go to Canada to see the
The
presidents of the
presidents
United
of the
States
United
of
States of
America.
America.
But we
Nicely
went
done.
to a place that I understand isn't there anymore. It was called Lee's Palace in Toronto, and it was a different vibe because at that point in my life I'd only ever been to shows in New York,
Yeah.
and it depended on what it was. I went to see Rancid and I lost my shoes, never to be seen again.
Nice.
And then other times you'd go and it wasn't. That was the one thing I remember about that Rancid concert. I'm like, I'm pretty sure
Not
it was
where
a
they
good
were,
time.
just that you lost them. Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. I found
Nice.
one at the end of the night.
Oh, there you go.
What good is this gonna do?
You can hop along.
I did. I hopped to the
Yeah,
bus
there you go.
station. But anyway, and yeah, so I never take for granted the fact that, look, I grew up like 45 miles northwest of Manhattan, so it's right where the suburbs started to get rural.
Nice.
And like I said, in the summers I would go to the county fair, but most of the year, if I wanted to see something, I would go into New York. But traffic permitting, it was an hour and a half, especially if I took a train or something. So I at least had those options, and I've lived in LA for 20 years, and there's
busy,
even to this day, I'm like, well,
busy.
dude, it's funny.
Traffic.
Two things that we've talked about. It's coming up later in the month. Do I want to go see George Lynch's record release party at the Whiskey, or do I want to try and see Alice Cooper and Rob Zombie at the casino? It's like you get a lot of choices, and you're like,
Yeah.
of course, everything converges on these one or 2 days.
Is that for the
And
Babylon CD that he's releasing for Lynch Mob? Is that Babylon?
yeah, it's the Babylon.
Nice.
Yeah, that's what I
Looking
had
forward to
talked to
that.
him about.
Looking
Yeah,
forward to that. Yeah.
there were only 2 songs out when
Yep.
he and I spoke, but I was fishing for more songs. I was fishing for the guest list. Chad, you would have been proud.
Yes.
I'm like, oh, maybe I'll go by that show. He's like, yeah, you should come on by. And I'm like, all right. Let me send a clip of that to the publicist.
Nice.
Like, see what he said.
Yeah.
But then I realized it was the
I'm
same.
everybody guess. Yeah.
So so look, I mean, I feel like the where you grow up is a big difference, and sometimes regionally, not even dealing with Canada and the CanCon laws you're talking about. It's just some artists are way bigger. Like I moved to LA, and I was like, I was okay with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Didn't love them, definitely didn't hate them.
Yeah,
but I hear them so much that I'm like, I don't even like the songs that I used to like because I've heard them too much.
Under the Bridge. You're done.
You're
done with Under the Bridge.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Makes me want to go under the bridge.
Under the LA Bridge, exactly.
But, I moved here, and like, they're still huge artists, but I wasn't hearing so much Billy Joel and Bruce Springsteen when I moved to LA. You kind of realize like, oh yeah, there's a little bit
Jersey. That's an East Coast thing, or Bon Jovi, if you want to get in that era.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
You mentioned the Tragically Hip too, and that's a thing
sure.
where Canada is like, obviously it's a big, huge band here, but it's not everybody. Like, Canada's not a lot of people, but it's a big, huge country, right? Size wise. So not everybody is. I think the misconception is that, Tragically Hip, that must be Canada. Everyone in Canada loves Tragically Hip. It's not true. I like them, but they're like, it's like the Chili Peppers basically for me. There's a few songs I like, but beyond that, it's like, I could take it or leave it. I mean, it's a poetry, singer-songwriter story kind of songs, and some of them are good. And going back to that, I kind of like their older stuff when they kind of were more of a rocking band. They kind of really, like most bands do, mellow out their sound a little bit when they get older. And now, unfortunately, Gord Downie, the singer, passed away in 2015. He had brain cancer, unfortunately. So sorry to hear that. It was a big loss. It was a big concert that he did at the end too, just to kind of say goodbye, which was very cool. Well done. And unlike a lot of other bands, though, it doesn't matter where you're from. Unlike a lot of bands, they say they're done and they're done. They're not going to come back. So retirement is retirement.
Even when you hold a press conference where everybody in the band signs a contract,
cessation of touring,
and even when everybody in the band says, if we go back out, we're gonna buy tickets for everybody. Mick Mars, of course.
Well, he's not there anymore, so you can't hold him to it. He's out of the band. We'll never come back because we don't want to be like half the band with no original members and be a shell of our former selves and not have backing tracks.
Yeah, I know.
Fuck off, Nikki.
It's funny. I've in the last few years, I've gotten to know the comedian Don Jameson, who was on their show. Yeah, was on their show, that metal show, where he said that. And so as soon as they started touring again, Don was like, "So, Mick,
where's my ticket? Where's my tickets?" Embarrassed him. Yeah, I love Don. I listened to him. I watched a couple of some of your podcasts. I watched the one he did, the roundtable with him, and I forget who else was there. What record were you talking about? Now it's escaping.
We did I did one on his show where we did the newest Alice Cooper album. Then a few years ago,
that was it.
A few years ago we did the Detroit Stories Alice Cooper album, which it was myself.
Maybe it was that. It was one of those two. It was with Don for sure. Because I like
my friend Carson, who she works in country radio, but she's a huge hard rock and metal fan.
Okay.
And Mark Cicchini, who's on a Kiss podcast called Three Sides of the Coin, which they've been doing for like 10 years. Yeah. And you're like, oh, well, clearly you can't talk about Kiss for 10 years, but those guys managed to do it,
Hey, if they can do it, so can anybody else.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the fun thing. I was talking about this recently.
I can't even believe I'm in Kiss.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I was talking about how sort of the advent of the pandemic. I've been doing a podcast for 10 years now. Nice. And all of a sudden, no artists could go out on tour, and I was home a lot more than I wanted to be. And all of a sudden, the publicists that I knew, they were like, hey, so and so's doing a press tour. Do you have room for him? And for a long time, I worked for the comedian Dennis Miller from Saturday
Nice.
Night Live and other
Yes.
things.
Big fan.
And so I was just like, oh, Dennis doesn't have a show anymore. And they're like, no, for your show. I'm like, really? Okay. Because what did they care? They were sitting in their homes, and then they're like, you line up a media tour. So I got to talk to some of my favorite artists. I
One
got
of your heroes. Yeah.
it was so much fun to get to do it, and you sort of kind of build that up. There's guys that I've talked to a few times. Just it comes up, and that's kind of what I wanted to transition to asking you about was Paradise City, your show. So when do you start doing it? And explain for our audience a little bit about the show.
Whew, that's a bit of a big story. I'll try to condense it as much as I can. So when it airs, it's Saturday nights at 9 p.m. That's Eastern Standard Time, but it's available on demand on Mixcloud, mixcloud.com. Search for Paradise City. I'll put the links up, or I can give you some links if you want to share them
Yeah,
out
definitely
too.
give me some links. I'll send them
for
out.
sure.
Yeah.
It's better than just saying them sometimes. But you have to go back to when I started my podcast, which was in 2017. That was called Nobody's or Somebody's Podcast. And the reason why I did that, and this is pre-pandemic, obviously, but I was a big fan, obviously, of listening to podcasts as well. So the two of the big ones I listened to was the Eddie Trunk podcast at the time when he did just a podcast before he was on all the time. And Chris Jericho's Talk is Jericho. I used to listen to that all the time too. And I loved the style. I loved, talking to the way they would talk and ask questions to people and dig deep on people's real stories, not just about what they're there to promote as far as a record or a movie or whoever the guest might be, but getting their human stories about who they are, where they grew up, what led them to this path, like inner workings, not dirt, but just like actual human stories about the people themselves. I liked how they asked their questions. I liked their style. And I thought, as most people do, like, oh, they can do it. I can do this too, right? But the difference between an Eddie Trunk or a Chris Jericho and me is that, yeah, we can all talk, but they know some important people that people want to hear about, like people like you and me or regular people want to hear about. I don't know anybody. I know people with great stories, but I don't know anybody famous. I know basically all I know is a bunch of nobodies. Oh,
Yeah.
nobody's or somebody's. Oh, it just like that just popped in my head. Nobody's or somebody's.
No, it's a great concept. I like it.
Yeah, it's just an idea where I could talk to people. If you care about a story that's interesting, and if you don't know who this person is, but if you like to hear a compelling or fascinating, or at least what I think might be a fascinating story, you're going to listen to that and just kind of grow from there. So I'd interview people in my life, like friends, family, people who I knew that, well, first, if they wanted to talk, but second of all, if they had I knew they had something in their life that if other people heard it too, they might connect with it or just be like, wow, fascinated by that story. And then, so to kind of quicken this up a bit, doing that for a little bit, I decided to, because now with the internet, anybody can do it, which is a good thing or a bad thing. Anybody can start an online radio station and bypass all those like FM, AM stuff. And you can just, for a nominal fee per month, you can start a radio station. That's more true than ever today. But this is back in 2019. I started basically a branding for the podcast. So it's Nobody's Radio Station, heavy rock radio. So it's Nobody's Radio Station, Nobody's or Somebody's Podcast. You get a theme there, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. And then so Paradise City. So basically the reason I started all that is because a big fan of radio, listening to the radio. I got tired of hearing the same stuff on the commercial radio all the time. Didn't matter where I listened, and that's across every country. You're going to get the same playlist for the reasons that we could go. That's a whole nother conversation. I understand why, from a business standpoint, advertisers, they need to know that people are listening. What gets people listening? The most amount of songs that the majority of people will know. You can't play deep cuts because people might, I don't know this song. It's not exciting me. Change the channel. I can't see where I am here. Change the channel, right? So you want advertisers to stick around and give you, that's how you support the station, right? As far as commercial radio, you need them to buy into your product. And the way to do that is to play songs that everybody knows or the majority of people know. But if you have an online internet radio station, you're not beholden to that because unless you don't mind paying the monthly fee, which I don't, for the music licensing. If you're not worried about sponsorship or having advertisers or whatever, you can basically create your own playlist. You can put whatever you want on there and hope to God that people discover it by however you do that, by putting yourself out there, your own promotion, paying for it, which putting your own money into it, investing in it, and you can hopefully get content that's exciting for people by playing different songs by different artists, or take a band like Def Leppard, instead of playing Pour Some Sugar or Hysteria or Love Bites, I'll play a deep track from there, like Tonight or Heaven is a Girl, songs like that, right? So to that, when I built the radio station, I knew I needed some extra content. It could be just a 24-hour playlist, and I'm not always going to be on there announcing, "Hey, this is Chad Weiss. Welcome. You just heard, traffic and weather together, bumper to bumper. It's 98 degrees outside." I didn't have time for that because I still had to work a regular job, and I got kids, I got responsibilities and stuff like that. So I didn't have time to sit on it. I'd love to, if that was gonna be my thing. I'd love to sit on a radio station all day and talk, but that just wasn't feasible. But I needed to put some content on there. And I made the choice when I did the radio station that I wanted to be like an active rock station. And for people that don't know what that means, it's like the modern rock of today, like the heavier bands, like maybe Five Finger or Avenged or Disturbed or things. I'm just naming the bigger ones, but there's other ones, POD, stuff like that.
Yeah,
right?
those are perfect examples for
sure. Not an 80s rock station. I love 80s rock. I love 80s pop, as you know, 90s. I love 80s country too, but I can't, you also don't want to mess around. If you're going to pick a format, you kind of need to stick to that, as we know. You can't I can't play like a Dwight Yoakam and an Avenged Sevenfold. I love to, but that's a hard sell, right? So you can't really do that. But I knew that an 80s rock show, even though it's not active rock, it still has a big audience. It's still a niche that people like you and me and millions of others will enjoy. And I could really tap into that. So I had the idea for it. Well, I'm Chad Weiss. So again, here's what the names. Well, take you down to Paradise City. Oh, Paravice City. Oh, Paravice. That's kind of cool. So the names, to me, I don't know, there wasn't a whole lot of thought process. It was just, for some reason, naturally, they came to me like, oh, like Nobody's or Somebody's, Paravice City. So I remember mentioning that to a friend of mine, Kevin Matthews, who up until recently, actually, breaking news, was my co-host on the show. He did it for about 4 years. But I mentioned doing this show, and he's like, oh, I wouldn't mind being a co-host, a guest on that sometimes. And he ended up staying for 4 years, but that's cool. I'm really thankful that he did that.
That's very cool, yeah.
And we were going to do an hour, like basically a self-produced 1 hour 80s rock show with us, talking and rocking, basically, like talking about the music that we're playing and just doing a 1 hour show that would just sit there and people checked it out. That'd be great. And if they heard it, that's even better. And it was more a vehicle about the music. It's not about putting us over. It was about getting these songs over, getting these, bands that you don't hear, like Shark Island, like Sleazebees, like Trickster, or Deeper Cuts by Warrant, or Def Leppard, or Gorky Park from Russia, if you ever heard of them.
Sure, yeah, I
just
remember
going
Gorky
deep.
Park,
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So just great music, yeah.
No, and to the point that you're making, sort of like the programming of, a lot of, especially like classic rock is the format that sticks around the most.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you kind of like listen for a while and you go like, can you just play something from side 2 of the greatest hits? Like, it's like, I get it. You want to play the songs people know, but does it always have to be Sweet Emotion or Dream On? People know.
Mama just killed a man.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's like, play Stone Cold Crazy once in a while. I mean,
oh my God,
it's
that's unheard of.
I know it's a crazy idea, but it's like I'm not even looking for deep tracks on some of these stations. That's why you mentioned satellite radio earlier. Obviously, there is a channel on Sirius XM called Deep Tracks, and sometimes the tracks aren't as deep as maybe they make it seem, but it's not those same. It's like classic.
It's not like
rock,
on Hair Nation itself, where you get a bunch of the same
right,
bands.
Exactly. Like classic rock, a lot of times it's like top 40, but just it's 40 classic rock songs. So it's like the same songs, same playlist. That you're gonna hear, whenever
standard
you listen.
Playlist.
And it's great to be able to sort of program your own station and play some of that stuff. Yeah, I mean, Hair Nation, I will put on, and they'll sneak in stuff that you hadn't thought of in a little while. Like Every Mother's
very
Nightmare,
rare, but you got to be listening. They make you wait. They'll make you wait for it.
They'll definitely make you wait for it. Yeah. Exactly. And but then of course the problem is like a lot of these artists make new music, but you can't hear it anywhere, and I mean too. Even Def Leppard, they made a new album last year, and I think like when it came out, they did like a special, and then it was like right back to a little bit a little bit of Pyromania, but mostly Hysteria.
Yeah.
And
Take What You Want is a great song that, if for those that don't know, the single that was off that record, that would fit right on between Pyromania and Hysteria, maybe even a bit of High and Dry. That Take What You Want really was a huge banger to open it up. I wish all the record was like that. You get what you can't always get what you want, obviously, but that was a good one that would fit right in with one of those songs, right?
Yeah, and I agree with you in the sense that you listen to Jericho's podcast. I would listen to like the big ones, like he talked to Paul Stanley, so I've heard like some of those. But Eddie Trunk, he was a New York, New Jersey guy, so I would hear him on the radio. So I already
now he's part-time Vegas guy, as he mentions.
Yeah,
very much
I know
day.
he is. Yeah, and but so when they started having that music talk channel volume that's not there anymore, he was like, I wouldn't say I listen to his show every day, but I download and listen to every episode just eventually over time.
Yep, me too.
Because he had 3 of the guys from Tesla in studio literally on Monday, and I'm like,
doing
I
the
love
top
that band.
5 Tesla songs.
Yeah, right, exactly.
They were hilarious in there. If you just a little sidebar,
yeah, those guys are great.
Jeff's like, what song is this? I don't remember the song. Oh yeah, I sang that. And he was like, oh yeah, that's not a bad
they
song.
played him a little bit of it. I know, and I'm actually going to get to
hilarious.
talk to Jeff Keith for the
Keith?
first time,
Nice.
like 2 weeks from now. I've talked to Brian a few times. Very cool, very easy.
I love how Brian talks.
Guy.
Yeah, very laid back.
Yeah, Brian
he's the business guy
from
at
Tesla.
Yeah,
he's the business guy, and I've interviewed him a few times. He's always, he's
cool.
He's quick to add me to the guest list. I don't have to, fish
nice.
around for it, so it's great.
Awesome.
And it's a great band. And they continue to put out great music. And
they got that residency in Vegas right now.
Yeah,
for those who want to check that out.
I went to the residency that they did the first time I was in Vegas for my kids were on spring break. So believe it or not, it's actually a fun place to take kids. Not everybody believes me, but believe me, it is.
I want to get there.
And so I went, and it was great. They played the House of Blues there, and it was like the perfect size venue for a band that
they're doing well.
They usually play arenas, maybe sometimes third build, but so it's great that a lot of this stuff is still out there. And I guess a lot of the money really is in performing live now. So the new music is secondary. You have huge artists who say that they won't bother making new music. And look, in some cases, it's fine. Don't make new music. It's probably better that way.
If you're gonna phone it in, just leave the phone down off the hook.
A band like Tesla, they do something every few years. Cheap Trick puts out a new album every couple of years, and I'm always interested. Do I love everything? No, but it's like it's cool to see where they're at right now and what they want to put out. But you have to really be so into the band to know that there's a new album. You have to listen.
You have to do your own homework.
You have to do you have to listen to a show.
Do something called Google. Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Or when people call in, hey, whatever happened to? Have you heard of Google?
Yeah, right.
You have a phone in your pocket, the mini device. In 1 second, they'll tell you everything you want to ever know about your band, and they want you to know about it. But you just gotta call up Eddie Trunk and say, hey, what happened to him? Let's Google together.
Whatever happened to Mike Tramp from White Lion? Well, he was
like,
on
what happened to Vito Bratta?
Week.
Whatever happened to Vito Bratta?
That's a good question. Whatever happened to Vito Bratta?
We know where he is. For those who know, you know where he is.
He's off the radar with John Sykes. You have some.
No one knows where John is right now. Hope he's okay. Yeah.
So in terms of putting together the content, so you and your co-host, would it just be sort of conversations like we have now, or do you do like lists? Like we're talking about Eddie Trunk had the top 5 Tesla songs from people who called in. Do you do themes like that, or how does the host portion of the show you do work?
We would later work. I would, as Kevin would accuse me of, I would steal a lot of my good ideas from Eddie Trunk or stuff I've heard later on, right? Yeah, for sure. But make it work in our context too. We don't have obviously the audience that Eddie does or has, but we would take some of that and modify it. Like as far as Kiss, Kevin's a huge Kiss fan, a Kiss psycho freak. So I don't mind Kiss. I love Kiss a lot too. But he knew everything about what underwear they were wearing that day, right? So I mean, he was all involved. He's a big, especially of Eric Singer. He's a big fan and knows a lot about his projects and stuff. So we'd work a lot of that in later. But I'll tell you this: the very first bunch of episodes, which you can't hear anymore, I took them off the internet. I mean, a little bit of a vanity project thing. But here's the thing: so starting all this, and even going back to doing my podcast, I got myself a nice microphone, like one of these Blue Yetis, which is awesome. I think you have one too. I can see it there. Love them.
And you sprung for what we can call the microphone condom, and I should, because it pops sometimes. But people make fun of me for talking into it sideways. But when I use it sideways, it doesn't pop as much. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, people think the mic is up here and it's actually in the middle too. People have to call mistake. It's like, hi, my name is exactly.
Yeah. But I'm gonna stop myself from turning the dials while we're recording because I realize that that'll be messed up for my next like 6 shows. But anyway,
I know.
I know. Getting one of these, like, it really changes the difference. It makes such a huge difference.
I bought, that was the first thing I did. So I splurged on that, but then, and this is no slight to, like, I have my unpaid promoter, Maurice, who's been instrumental in doing a lot of this with me and bringing me guests. And she's just a very, very amazing, important part of the show and all the shows I've done. At the time, she had basically a space where we could use, it was a big, huge boardroom, which is a great space to go and talk to and interview people. And it's like a great private space at her place of work at the time. But it's not conductive to sound. It's a big, open, big ass boardroom, right? So you're getting a lot of echo, or you're getting a lot of extra stuff. And these are great mics, as you know, they pick up a lot of stuff. And they're even worse than what they don't pick up, which is when people's voices are kind of like part of the room sound. Like you get us, and if you're sharing with somebody, like I only had one mic at the time. So what it was down to is me and Kevin either huddling up by the microphone on either side here, like, two kissing cousins. Or the person's way at the other end of the table. And then you hear me like we're talking now. And the other person's like, yeah, Chad, I really, really like that.
Yeah. And I tried that where I would put the microphone between two people.
Yeah, right in the middle of it. But then
what happens is you don't hear either of them.
Exactly.
So exactly. It's all the troubleshooting.
Yeah. And as a vanity, like for my vanity, I was like, oh, this is some really good content. And I listened back to it, and I would get, and Maurice knows this too, I got so down on myself and so depressed. I'm like, greatest show here, but no one can fucking, I don't know if I can swear, but
you can swear. Yeah, that's fine.
But no one can fucking hear this. Like no one can hear, like no one's going to enjoy listening to this, right? If you can have I could be talking to Robert Plant, but if you can only barely hear him, or he sounds far away, or like he's in a tin can, or he sounds like he recorded the drums on St. Anger, you're not going to want to listen to. I love that record. Yeah, I do. You're not going to want to listen to it. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter what they say. They could be talking about a Led Zeppelin reunion, and if it doesn't sound good, people don't give a shit. They don't want to hear it, and I'm included. Like when I hear bad stuff too, and I've even heard bad quality content on Sirius, which is kind of insane. But
especially because they'll do a lot of like remote setups and things like that, and
sometime on Jim Florentine's show, he interviews some people, and he sounds great, or he sounds bad, and they sound great. I don't know what's going on there. But I know he's not a professional podcaster, but still.
No, but I mean, look, he's also been doing that. He's been doing that show. I think it's still called
10 years.
Maybe
not anymore. He calls it the Jim Florentine Metal Show because they metal midgets.
At a certain point, you had to stop calling it that.
I don't know how long this name is going to last because the midgets are going to get mad and kick me in the shins or something like that.
Yeah, right, exactly. Hilarious. But he's been doing it long enough that you think he knows that how to plug.
Or Sirius would splurge for some.
And by the way, our pal in the chat, Dominicus Saxon, asks if I need him to send me a microphone condom. That's all right. I know how to put it on. I just prefer to do my show bareback and not use them. But thank you.
That's my style too. But
no, but yours is much more safe.
What were we talking about? Yeah, sorry, we were talking about something else. Oops.
So
for
I agree though, and that's like and sometimes
earlier production was bad. Was what I was trying to say. Like our early shows sounded bad. We had great music, but we sounded like garbage. Not what we were doing or saying, but the actual quality of the show, like as far as audio, which is what it's an audio show. All you've got. It's not like we had bad camera angles. It's audio or nothing. If you don't have good audio, that is depressing me. So I kind of that's my big regret on that. And I think it caused a lot of people too. If they were going to listen to the show, I think I lost some people back then because they're like, well, don't have time for that.
I had the advantage that when I started podcasting, I was still working for a nationally syndicated radio show. So I would make my coworkers stay after work and do my podcast with me. Nice. But we had this great equipment and I would make our board op put it together. And then when the show ended, that's the moment where the technology got a little iffy, like I did a show where I had this microphone and I was talking to a guest on a speakerphone on a cell phone. And then you realize all that stuff like, You might have thought that it sounded good, but boy, did
Oh,
it
when you play
not.
it back, it's so
Yeah.
depressing, and you don't know until the end. I've had that so
Yeah.
many times. It sounds good to me. You can hear me. I can hear you. I've interviewed a bunch of people. There's one girl I talked to rather recently, and I guess my window was open. We were talking on the phone. She sounded good. I sounded good, but it sounded like I was talking to her in the shower. I don't know what was going on. There was rainwater. I had to scrap it. I was like, "This is ridiculous. It sounds like I'm in the shower with her. Like, what's going on here?" Which is not right, but I mean, no one. It's just it was taken away from the sound.
Yeah.
It was really
And
frustrating.
I have a friend who literally just started it's a very sort of niche music centric podcast. He literally posted his first episode, and he I don't know what he used to record it, but he had to go through whenever the other person talked, and he didn't separate the audio tracks,
Yeah,
which
that's the same with
and so
Audacity.
by
Yeah.
not doing that, it
Mm,
created hours
you're
worth of
stuck.
work.
You're stuck.
And that's why sort of, I mean, look, I pay for StreamYard as a program, but it makes it so much easier than anything I did before. When the pandemic started, everybody started using Zoom. It's actually not
Me
great for
too. No,
recording and doing
it's not. I
shows.
use it. It's free. I use it because it's free, but then it cuts me
Yeah.
out every 40 minutes, and that's annoying, especially when I'm talking to artists like musicians. It's
Yeah.
like, can you hang on for a bit while I come back to you? And they're cool about it, but it's like, oh, it's so unprofessional. But I
Yeah,
do
I
what I
know.
do. I don't want to pay the big rate. Is StreamYard? Can I ask you about StreamYard?
Yeah.
Is it more cost effective than Zoom per year per month?
It's probably a little bit more for a year. But at the same time, I get so much more value
Because it
out of it.
looks cool
It's
from what you got set up here. Yeah.
you can definitely dress it up a little bit. You can put these comments live on the stream. You can also you can schedule it, and it goes to your YouTube easily. I still haven't been able to
Oh,
figure
nice.
out how to do all that stuff on Zoom, and I think you can
I don't
do
think
it
it
now.
does.
But a couple years ago,
Oh,
you
really?
couldn't. You couldn't
Okay.
schedule it. You just had to go live, and then it would pop up. And I
Yeah.
want you want people to know, like, oh, tune in. Especially like I'm going to talk to Jeff Keith. I'll tag Tesla in that, and I talked to Frank Hannon from Tesla earlier in the year, and they posted it. And I
Do
was
you do
like,
it
well,
live? Your conversations? Do you do them live?
that one I did because I wanted to. There's a choice sometimes. There's
Because I don't
advantage
do
to doing
mine
a show.
live, so that's
There's a
that's maybe
choice
part
to
of the
doing it
reason.
live where you can get a little bit of interaction, but I have had a couple happen where somebody's in South Florida and their power goes out,
Yep.
then you're stuck.
Yeah.
But if you're recording it, you don't have to worry about that stuff. So
Yeah, exactly.
when I talked to George Lynch yesterday, he was driving around. So I was really glad that I recorded it so I can tweak it and
Did his
at a
window
certain
down?
point.
Was his hair going through? And he was like
No, but
stopping.
there's a
Did he go through
point.
McDonald's drive-through? And
There's
just...
a point where he moved the phone, and then it's better for the rest of the interview.
Mhm.
So it's a little behind the curtain for my audience.
I get that too.
If you listen to the audio version, you probably won't know, but if you watch the video, you'll be like, I can kind of hear him,
Nice.
But so I think that for big shows that involve, where there's an expectation of interaction, every year we do a show promoting the baseball playoffs. So we
Nice.
get a little back and forth going during that, and that's sort of the thing too, is that what I like about doing my show is that my focus is like, well, what do I feel like talking about?
Yeah.
Do a lot of music stuff. And, you're talking about Maurice, who works with you. And she posted in just a Facebook group for people who host podcasts, and it was like it had a
She's
little
always
link
like,
to
you should get on other people's podcasts. You got to get down with OPP.
Well,
Yeah,
it makes a huge.
Yeah.
It definitely
Yeah.
makes a huge difference. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just because it's like people who if you post a link to this after the fact, which you don't have to, but if you do,
I will.
people might find my channel and be like, oh, look at some of these interviews he's had.
I hope so. That's
People
the
who
idea,
hear
yeah.
you on this show will be like, oh, I'll put on that channel and listen to not the same 40 classic rock songs. I love that idea.
Do it. Yeah. Try it
So
once. You'll love it.
there's definitely something to be said for it. And I mean, I just read a little bit about some of the music you liked, and I wrote to Maurice, like, yeah, let's definitely do this. I hope she got more feedback, but
I think
it was
so.
a great
I think
idea.
I'm booked a couple places. I think we got to go through all that. Yeah, between the ones I do and then the ones I get on. Yeah, I should have a nice little full schedule, which we love. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And
Yeah.
it's so easy to do, and
Mhm.
I mean, just again, it's not the days of like, driving around a city having to stop into radio stations and trying to do it. It's
Which would be cool to me. I wouldn't have mind doing that
Sure.
back in the day too, because there's nothing like an old school radio and doing it live in a studio, or even being on the radio back in the day, even doing it overnight, if that still existed, like an actual overnight personality would be amazing to me. That's if I could do it now, that's what I would want to do. That doesn't exist, and in fact, most of the stations now are starting to go AI. I think from what I've heard, not a real person there.
I've been on shows where we've played clips of, AIs that they just feed like news stories and, like time and temperature and that sort of thing. And
not into that.
It's not great, but then, but for decades there haven't been like the overnight people actually there in the studio. So
that's what we've done. But now I have my own station and we do pay, of course, it's very important that, and this has come up before too, but, one thing I want to mention too is that we are on platforms that do pay the artists as far as like ASCAP and PPL for the UK people, and then SOCAN here in Canada. They all get the performance music publishing rights. They're all paid as they should be, and that's very, very important that every size artist gets paid for their work.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, I think that, when people hear artists speak out on that, like obviously, Lars Ulrich from Metallica got so much shit for speaking out against Napster. But even at the time, he's like, I'm not doing this for us. Like we got plenty
for
of money.
everybody.
Okay.
Yeah. What about the little bands?
And he's 100% right because, iTunes is basically, licensed Napster where you pay a little bit, but it's the same idea. And it's just, and what it did to very little bit
for the artists.
What it did for the artists and what it's done to, the album, you have bands who just like, we'll just put out songs because what's the point, and I love when a band puts out an album, that's why I love, breaking down a new Alice Cooper album with Don Jamieson and
Physical Records. You can see in the background there. I don't know if you can point, but I love the
I see Ride the Lightning, and if
there's I don't know if you can see, but there's like a little sample of my musical collection.
Yeah, is that Twisted Sister next to Ride the Lightning?
Yeah, and then you got Mick Jagger, you got Taylor Dane, you got some Pantera. So there's a good idea, and some Helix, of course. Got to get that CanCon in there.
You got to get the CanCon in there. Yeah, that's right. If you don't have a Canadian record
CanCon,
on the wall,
I'm not allowed to be here. Then I can't talk to you.
Canadian YouTube.
CanCon laws, Oh god, but that's so that's kind of a sample. If anyone wants to know how my music range stretches, there's a good idea of it right there.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's very cool to have sort of a great mixture like that.
And I rotate them out too, but depends on who I'm talking to in the background. That's my background,
Right. Yeah. If you're going to talk to somebody that you're like, all right, I'm going to put up, their favorite bands or their record.
Well, I've got the Black Sabbath one. I don't know if you know the record, the Born Again record, the front cover with that Demon Baby, which is one of my favorite albums that has Ian on it. That's right. A great.
That's the
scary,
Ian Gillan album, right? That's the one. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Which, apparently he got so drunk he said he'd make an album with them. And
sure, I'll do an album with Black Sabbath.
He's like, wait, am I really? Oh, okay, I guess.
The first song was called Trashed. I mean, what do you think that comes from, right? That bitch was trashed.
So as we start to wind down here, Chad, what are some of the things you're excited about these days in terms of, even if it's new music from classic artists? I rack my brain all the time on this show and just conversationally. I try to come up with bands that their first album came out in the 21st century that I really like. And, there's bands like Rival Sons, Dirty Honey, there's some of those bands are great, but for the most part, what I tend to get excited about are a lot of, like I said, like I'll plan around a new Alice Cooper album, make sure I get it. A new Dirty Honey album I might not know for a little bit, but always great to check out something new. Is there new stuff, whether it's new artists or just new releases that right now maybe you'd be programming on your show or just putting on that CD player that's still there at your house?
Well, as far as the show goes, every week we have something called the new music section, which is either new music from a classic band like Queensryche or new songs by obviously Lynch Mob coming up too as well, or new bands like a band called Lost Hearts or Black Heart Saints or Rival Sons or Dirty Honey that have new songs that have that 80s that kind of that style, you know what I mean? That kind of like that. Similar hard rock style. So new bands with music that sounds like that, or classic bands with new music. That's where that goes every week as far as the show goes. But as far as me personally looking forward to new music, obviously that new Lynch Mob is one I'm looking forward to. The Alice Cooper one I haven't got my hands on yet. I still want to. I still have to pick up the last Queensryche record too, the DNA, I think it's called.
Yeah,
The
I
Noise
saw
Alliance,
them.
yeah, Digital
I think
Noise
this was
Alliance.
right before
Yeah.
the pandemic, that album, and it was the first time I saw them with Todd, and
Oh
it
wow,
was great. Yeah, because
nice.
I saw them on the Empire tour, which was when they did Operation Mindcrime in its entirety.
Yes,
So
classic
it
tape.
was, yeah, it was
Yeah,
yeah, right, exactly. They put out
yeah,
that the live version of that,
yeah, yeah.
but so it had been a
Live
little while
Crime, I think
since
it was
they'd
called,
seen
right?
them.
Live Crime.
Yeah, live crime,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And I mean, he's great, and
Todd's
it's one of those
amazing.
things where you have to kind of get past it a little bit. Sometimes when the especially the vocalist, there's a lot of, like, you can switch out a lot of things and it's all right, but seeing I went to, speaking of Def Leppard, I saw them a few years ago. They toured with Journey. It was the first I'd actually never seen Journey, and Arnell's been in the band for a while.
Yeah,
He's
I
not a
know. I
kid
still
anymore,
haven't. Yeah, I know. He's 50
and it's
something, but
just like,
yeah.
oh, he sounds so good. It's like,
Mhm.
no, it's not the visual you're expecting,
No, I know. He doesn't
but
look like Steve Perry, but he
he doesn't
sounds a
look like
bit like
Steve
him.
Perry at all.
No, he
But
sounds a
Steve,
lot like Steve Perry as Dean,
yeah,
Castronova
the
in the back.
Castronova,
He
yeah, of
sounds way more
course,
like Steve if you
yeah,
listen to his Revolution Saints. Jeff Pilson,
yeah,
who's not or was in there, is in there.
yeah.
Pilson, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no, and
yeah.
I know, I
Tying it all
definitely,
together.
I have friends who, like, don't wanna check out the last, like, 20 years of Skid Row releases because it's not Sebastian. I'm like, I get
Yeah,
it,
it's your
but,
choice, your loss.
yeah, because,
I
yeah,
love
I
the
mean,
Johnny records. I bought most of
yeah,
the
I
Johnny records, like
yeah,
Skin
I
and
saw them with
Revolution.
Johnny a few years ago, and then
Rest in peace, Johnny.
the new record with, the new record
And the new one,
with
yeah,
Eric.
with Eric, yeah, which I
Yeah,
hope he's doing okay. I know they had to cancel a bunch of stuff. They were doing North America. They're supposed to come up here for a little bit too. I really want to
yeah.
check them out. I've seen Sebastian live. I've never seen Skid Row, so I wouldn't mind seeing them. But I hope Eric's doing okay.
Yeah, I saw Skid Row, and this is 92, I think. They didn't play the
Did they open
arena
for
in New
GNR?
Jersey.
Did they
What's
open
that?
for? Was that when they were opening for
No, no.
GNR
So this is better than that.
or
This was their
Pantera was
headline
opening?
tour for Slave to the Grind,
Yeah,
and they played at the parking lot at the Meadowlands Arena. They set up a
nice.
stage and chairs there because I guess they were just felt like, all right, we're not going to sell that many tickets, but it was a huge crowd.
Oh yeah,
But Pantera opened for them, and this
yes, I
is
heard about that
already
tour.
vulgar display of power. Pantera. This isn't like early Pantera,
They both
and
stepped it up.
yeah, it was
Yeah,
great. And Ace Frehley came out because he was living in Jersey at the time. He came out as
yes.
a guest. It
I think he's
was
back there now too.
yeah, right,
Yeah,
exactly. It was
yeah,
a
he's
great
back in
show,
Jersey. Yeah, yeah, that's
and
cool.
I saw Sebastian a couple years ago. He was doing Slave to the Grind in its entirety, and I was
Um,
just like, yeah, I'll check that out. But also great. And I
yeah, yeah.
saw Skid Row without him, and I don't know. It just depends
It's all
on
good music. I love Sebastian's
yeah,
solo stuff. I've seen Sebastian live when the '06 version of GNR did the tour. It was just Axel and a bunch of guys. I saw that tour as
yeah.
well. But I've never seen Skid Row, so I'd like to see them before they change singers or do something
Well,
else.
you always have to be careful, yeah, because
Yeah,
from the last time that I saw them with Johnny, I
there's
think
with
they've had
Harnell.
this is their
Yeah,
third singer because
JP.
they think they
Yeah,
had oh no,
that
I'm confusing
JP
them with
theory
Great
third.
White.
Well,
I'm
that's
confusing
another
them
thing.
with
You got
Great White
yeah,
because
that's
Great
every
White had
couple
Mitch
months.
Malloy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Mitch
so
Malloy. They had
it's
Brett.
almost
They
like you
had
have to get a
Andrew
bingo
Freeman.
card for some of these
Exactly.
bands,
That's a
and
little
figure it
much.
all out.
That's too bad. I'll support everything. They had Terry Alous. I'm not. I don't know how to
Yeah,
say that, but yeah,
I talked to Terry. He lives down the street from me,
Terry
and
sounds amazing. Still, his
I've
new
interviewed
stuff
him
that
a
he
couple
does.
of times,
That's
and
cool.
yeah,
Yeah,
he's a great guy. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Well,
That's cool.
Chad, it was great getting to know you, get to chat with you, and
Yeah, hope we can do it again.
we'll have to figure out some of those album roundtables. Seems like they might be up
Yes,
your alley,
I'm here.
and we'll definitely stay in touch. But take a moment, give the hard sell to everybody out there. I know you mentioned
Ooh.
it earlier, but tell them where they can find your station and any of the content, and where to find you just in general.
Well, I'm all over, of course, social media. I'm at Sebcamco, SEBCAMCO. Paradise City, you can catch that every Saturday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's on Nobody's radio station, Heavy Rock Radio. Just Google that. You'll find that, no problem. Past episodes of Paradise City, they're on Mixcloud. It's a free app you can download. You can listen to it anywhere in your car. You don't have to pay for it. You can check it out anywhere. Mixcloud.com. Search for Paradise City, all one word, Paradise with a V. And just everything I do, everything about me, the podcast, Nobody's or Somebody's, you can Google that if you're lazy, or just go to sebcamco.com, SEBCAMCO.com. Sebastian and Cameron, two of my youngest sons, that's where Sebcam code comes from. So
I was going
that's
to
all things
ask
Chad
because
Weiss.
I was trying to figure it out.
What's
And
he
I'm like,
talking about? What's that about? Is
yeah,
that
I'm like,
that's not
I can't come up with it. But
how many names
yeah.
does this guy need? That's the hard
Well,
sell. Come and just check
and
me out and say hi and check out Christian, obviously, and
yeah,
support what he does.
If you ended up here through Chad, you can find me Twitter, Instagram at ChristianDMZ. Our show, the Bladtcast, Bladtcast. It's on the YouTube channel, but you can also find the audio version. And we've had a real mixed bag of stuff lately. Some artist interviews. We commemorated the 30th anniversary of the Chevy Chase show, which lasted for 5 weeks. We looked at some very special sitcom episodes. We do movie specials, so a little bit of everything. You can find it all on the Bladtcast, Bladtcast. And of course, the crown jewel at the top is Who Are These Broadcasters, which is Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 Pacific on the Who Are These Podcasts network. And we have a lot of fun. We do the show live on their YouTube channel, play a lot of clips from broadcasters from around media. But that's all the time we have for now. Thanks so much, Chad. It's great getting to know you. I look forward to chatting again soon. And you know what? If anybody who wants to get a comment up on the screen last minute, they just have to compliment me. Thank you, Radish Diff. I enjoy all the diffs, but Radish Diff, there's that you have a special part in a special spot in my heart. But you can find me, as I said, at Christian DMZ. That's all the time for now. We'll see you next time on the Bladtcast.